Patch 14.3 is live and TFT flow has been updated as usual. What a patch for the game of TFT. Mortdog has made an announcement that he's going to be stepping back from all of the extra communication that he did. So no more Twitter posts where he used to go into detail about game development, give insight in terms of how the balancing team was approaching different changes. We're no longer going to get those announcements on his Twitter related to bugs and a bunch of other things that I think were really valuable. We're not going to get the patch rundowns on Sundays anymore, which were a really good way to get an understanding of what the patch changes were. He's not going to be streaming anymore, most likely, and if he does stream, it's not necessarily going to be related to TFT. And he quotes the level of animosity towards him as a reason for why he can't justify all of the extra time that he's committing. In terms of my opinion, because this has been a really big discussion within the community, I would say it's the natural progression for anybody who decides to take the mantle that Mortdog decided to take. For example, if we look at Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games, these are the developers behind Path of Exile, which is the main ARPG competing with Diablo. He quietly stepped back. So he used to be a very core driving force behind the game. He was the visionary behind it from the very beginning, and he was part of all communications that the developers had with the players. And kind of out of nowhere, at least from the perspective of somebody who plays the game casually, he kind of just disappeared. And then people discovered that he was gone through legal documentation and some quotes from employees that worked at the company that he wasn't in the offices anymore. So this is a very quiet step back, and this is how they did their transition from relying on him. In the case of Mortdog, this is much louder. We at least understand that he's going to be stepping back from extra communication. He's still going to be working on teamfight tactics. He's still an important driving force behind the game, but I do wonder if we are reaching the end of an era. And the reason I say this is that in an FAQ that he released a couple of months ago, he had this to say.
Do you think you will stay with TFT for the rest of your career? I'm skeptical of the rest of my career. I am skeptical I'm going to work on TFT for 20 more years. I just don't think that's going to happen.
So obviously 20 years is a really long time, and he might work on TFT for 5 more years. But when we see indications like this, and I feel like when I watch him on stream and I watch him on anywhere that he posts and communicates, it feels like lately there has definitely been a little bit of burnout. And I'm curious if this is going to be the beginning of the end. And I only say this not to be alarmist, but more to indicate that we should be grateful for the time that we had. And I'm curious how the transition will go. I wanted to start this video a little bit different. Now let's get back to the patch guide. All right, patch 14.3. What do you need to know in order to do well in this patch? Well, first of all, Vertical Street Demon or Brand is really powerful right now. It has the highest pick rate in the meta at 1.7, which is astronomically high. That means on average, 1.7 players are playing this comp every single game, which may sound like it's low actually, because normally you're seeing like 2 to 3 people contest this line. But if you look at historical data, that pick rate is astronomically high, and this comp is still performing relatively well despite how contested it is. So you do need to know about it. Twisted Fate is still very good. Even with the new variation, the win rate is still very low, but the top 4 rate is very high, which means that it is on average going to gain ULP. Vexotech is also very good, even in this particular patch. Some people thought that for some reason it's not as good. No, it's still very good. It still has a very high pick rate. It's actually the second highest pick rate comp in the meta right now, and it still caps out ridiculously high if you're able to get to all of those 5 costs. Strategist A.M.P is back because they made a buff to Samira, and they also made a buff to 5 A.M.P. So the combination of those two things together have made AMP really powerful. Vanguard Marksman, this comp was never really gone, but it is definitely stronger now, and it is your main Rageblade option if you are not looking to play into Twisted Fate. It also has a very low win rate, and it is less consistent than Twisted Fate, but it is an option if you're looking to play into AD. And then lastly, we have Rengar Jinx Reroll. Again, this is benefiting from the fact that 7 Street Demon is so broken. If you are looking to play Rengar, you're always looking to go vertical into Street Demon now. You should never look to play the old version with Executioners and only 3 Street Demon with Echo plus Nico. You should always be looking to play into the vertical Street Demon line when you're looking to play around Rengar. Now, when it comes to your hero augments here, again, none of them are S tier. Most of the time, you really shouldn't be looking to play these, but they have made a number of buffs to Poppy. They have made a number of buffs to Gragas, and they just generally buff bruisers. So those two two hero augments are up in A tier, and then they made some nerfs to Jarvan and Vayne, which brings Kayn back down to B tier. When it comes to artifacts here, there are a lot more options than before because all of the buffs that they made to bruisers mean that Fiddlesticks, which was one of the best artifact lines in the game, is kind of back in the meta, and you need to know about it. So you have Anima Visage, you have Innervating Locket, you have Talisman of Ascension. All of those are good artifacts on Cho'Gath. And then on Fiddlesticks, you're looking for Blighting Jewel and Sniper's Focus like always. Anima Visage is actually a really interesting artifact though, because it's also really good on Nico and it's also solid on Braum. So a lot of people treat Anima Visage as a generic tank item, but it's actually a artifact that gives you a lot of direction towards a number of different meta lines currently. So definitely be open towards Anima Visage. We have Death's Defiance into Shaco Reroll, which is good. Gambler's Blade is now more into Twisted Fate than it is into Vayne after the nerfs that they made, but you can still play it into Vayne if you have a good spot for that. Mana Zane, of course, is still broken. They actually wanted to ship a nerf for this, but they didn't. So it is really powerful into Brand, really powerful into Veigar, and really powerful into Jinx. We have Mittens into Shaco, that's good. Silver Mirror into Rengar is still good, of course. And then we have Spectral Cutlass into Naafiri. This has gotten a lot more popular recently as more people are learning about Naafiri. I still think you should only play Naafiri if you have this particular artifact, although people are playing it regardless of that and doing relatively well. But I still think it's mostly a Spectral Cutlass check. And then you have Unending Despair and Zanya's into Twisted Fate that are quite good. When it comes to our emblems, we're looking for BoomBot, and you play into 6 BoomBot either way. I think the version that plays into Vex, which is this one right here, is a little bit better, but you can also play it into Twisted Fate if you think you're going to be able to hit that Urgot, which can be pretty hard to do when you're playing around 2-cost reroll. Bruiser Emblem has gotten a lot better in this particular patch because, again, they made a lot of buffs to the various bruisers, so Fiddlesticks Reroll in general is doing better. With Executioner Emblem, you should always play into the vertical Street Demon line with Jinx. And then we have Strategist Emblem, makes all the AP lines a little bit better. Street Demon Emblem, obviously very good this patch. And then Syndicate Emblem into Twisted Fate is quite good. When it comes to Cypher, the general rule of thumb with Cypher is that you're always looking to cash it out into a fast 8 composition that is good in this particular meta. And in that case, it is Street Demon and Vexotech are the main 2 options. And then you can also cash it out into Bastion Draven like we were doing in historical patches, but that's a lot worse now because all the Twisted Fate players are rolling for Draven. So I would typically want to cash this out into one of these AP lines. And then finally here, when it comes to augments, the big thing I want to note here is Board of Directors into Vexotech is still completely broken. All right, the first comp I want to talk about is Vertical Street Demon. Before we get started, you may have noticed this icon in the lower left. There are now comments that are enabled on all composition pages on TFT Flow. So if you have an opinion on how to play this comp, or if you want to suggest a correction to the guide, all you have to do is visit the page, click on this icon, and then you can type in your comment. Let's say this comp requires a lot of gold, and let's just make our name blue. You don't have to enter a name at all if you don't want to. It'll just show up as anonymous if you don't. And you can post a comment without an account at all, and it will just show up on the page. I think it's a really good way to get involved in the discussion with these different comps. I really do want it to be a unique value add for the website. So if you have any opinions of these different comps, make sure you check it out and leave your comments. It's very easy to do. Anyway, when it comes to Street Demon, this is the only thing that's balancing this is the fact that so many people are playing it. The pick rate right now, I mentioned it at the beginning of the video, is 1.7 in higher elo. That's one of the highest pick rates we've ever seen. And not only that, but because the AP lines have a lot of crossover with Nico and Samira, for example, Samira gets played in the Strategist AMP line, we're finding that it's very difficult sometimes to be able to hit this board. So the main condition for being able to play into this is you have to have a really good opener for it, maybe one of these openers that you see over here, and you're able to win streak, or you can look to play into Cypher and cash out on 3-7 and try to roll down on 4-1, or you have a really strong econ augment that allows you to roll down before everybody else is able to roll down, because that's typically how you want to play heavily contested lines, is you want to roll before everybody else rolls. If you have to roll down on 4-2, then I highly suggest that you learn what good augments are to click with this line, because you're going to want to pick your augment very quickly on 4-2 so that you roll before everybody else does, so that the people who take a long time to click their augment are going to roll after you roll. Okay, so those are the main suggestions. That's a little bit of a meta one right there. But the main understanding that you need to have is that you want to roll for these units before everybody else does. This is the best comp in the meta, but the hardest part is actually being able to hit the board. All right, the next comp I want to talk about here is Twisted Fate Reroll. This composition is doing really well right now. There's been a lot of changes since my last patch guide in terms of how you should play it. So previously you were looking to play this exclusively as 2-cost reroll, where you would 3-star your Twisted Fate, 3-star Darius as your primary tank, maybe 3-star a Skarner or a Rost as well, and you'd play Kog'Maw in the backline. The big change now is we're looking to 3-star Braum, and we're also looking to 3-star Draven in the backline as a secondary carry. This version is much stronger than before. It's still not going to win out in a lot of cases, even if you're able to 3-star Braum, Draven, and Twisted Fate. The win rate is just not that high for this comp, but the top 4 rate is very strong, even in spite of the fact that they actually nerfed Twisted Fate in 14.3. They lowered the amount of ability power that he gets per auto attack from 2 down to 1.5. This actually makes his double Rageblade builds a little bit weaker. Double Rageblade Zanya's is still completely broken, but most of the time you're looking for Rageblade, Gunblade, plus some third item. And that third item could be Archangel, it could be Jeweled Gauntlet, it could be Giant Slayer, it could be Guardbreaker, or it can just be that second Rageblade like we used to build before. When it comes to Braum itemization, you're looking for anything that gives him resistances and also increases his max HP. So there are some different builds that you should be aware of. First of all, we have these builds that are focused on Gargoyle plus some max HP increasing items. That can be Sunfire Cape, that could be Warmog's Armor, that could be Bramble Vest, that could be Dragon's Claw. All of these are solid items on Braum. You can also go for this double Gargoyle single frontline or solo frontline build as well. That works quite well. And then also I want to note that there are 2 really good artifacts on Braum, which are Unending Despair and Anima Visage. You'll note that both of these artifacts give max HP, and Unending Despair just gives really good bonuses with his shield, makes him do a lot of damage, and then you just pair that with max HP items, which increase the value of his shield, which makes Braum even stronger. So there are some really good artifacts for this line. The ones that you really need to be aware of are Unending Despair, Anima Visage, and Zanya's Paradox. All of these will make the line stronger. You're still probably not going to win out most of the time. It's very important that you hit Braum 3. It is less important that you hit Draven 3 because you can actually look to play around Misfortune as your duo carry and then put utility items like Shiv and Morello on Draven 2 if you want to. And then the last thing I want to note in terms of how to play this econ strategy wise is you're going to level up on 3-2. You're going to try to roll for Twisted Fate 2 as well as ideally Braum 2, but Darius 2 can cut it as well. And then on 4-2, you're going to roll or level to 7, and you're going to roll on 7 practically for the rest of the game until you're able to hit your Braum 3 and maybe Draven 3, and then you'll start pushing levels. And that's mainly how to play Twisted Fate. All right, the next comp I want to talk about is Vexotech. In my last patch guide, this was the new kid on the block at the time that I recorded it, and then it completely took over the meta. It was the second most popular comp behind Zeri. It is the second most popular comp again behind Brand this time, and you still want to play it from the same overall condition of losing, because if you play from lose streak, it's more likely that you're going to be able to get the tiers that you need for this composition. So first of all, Vex really wants to have blue buff plus Gunblade, and then her third item is flexible between Guardbreaker, Rabadon's, Giant Slayer, or one of these artifacts. And then you want as many tier items as possible on Sejuani. So you really want Vow on her. Adaptive is good as well. Redemption is fine. So you can use up to 3 tiers on Sejuani. So there are a lot of resources that you can invest in for this particular comp. And it's really easy to get those tiers if you're playing from lose streak. And it's a lot harder to get those tiers if you're not playing from lose streak. So that's one condition to be mindful of. And because lose streak is good, that obviously increases the value of Cypher. So Cypher into this line is quite strong. When it comes to your Exotech items, you're looking for Hollow Bow or Hyper Fangs for Varus. You're looking for tank items for Mordekaiser, Pulse Stabilizer, and Flux Capacitor are on the weaker side. And then eventually you're going to want to drop out of 5 Exotech down to 3 Exotech. And you can either play around this variation here where we have 3 Divinicorp, and you could play Kabuko here, you can play Zac here, you can play Urgot here, and then be mindful of the fact that Aurora can throw in another 5 costs. So you can have her throw in your Zac, you can have her throw in your Urgot, and you should know that Zac is one of the main win conditions for this line. So even though he's not on the board right now, you really want to have Zac. You want to be getting as many blobs for him as possible because having a high blob count Zac is one of the main win conditions for this line. And then there is this 4 Divinicorp line where we just drop out of that Kabuko for Gragas instead. This is a lower cost overall line that you can play, but there is a lot of options here for how to cap this board out. And realistically, you're not going to have enough gold most of the time to hit everything. So this is a comp that really benefits from lots of gold. For example, this is something you should put a little bit more emphasis angling into if you're playing in a portal like Scuttle Puddle, for example. So just something to be mindful of. All right, the next comp I want to talk about here is Strategist AMP. This is the comp that completely took over the first patch of the set in 14.1 before they B-patched it. And I'm really glad to actually see it back in patch 14.3 because if you look at the history of patching in this game, when a comp is really broken, the balancing team tends to just nuke it out of orbit and then it's never meta again for the rest of the set. And I feel like that's always been kind of bad. I don't really love that. Like, this is a comp we're familiar with. We should be able to play it. And I'm glad that it's back again. I'm glad we can actually play it. The big change that they made here is they buffed 5 AMP, where it went from providing only 4 AMP up to 5 AMP. And because of this change, and this is probably something they will have to address, it's pretty much always correct to play 5 AMP over 4 or 3 AMP with higher quality units. For example, the version of the comp that took over on 14.1 was this version, where we were looking to play around more 5 cost. And that's actually not the version that's going around right now. Now you're looking to play around these lower quality units with Naafiri and Italy because 5 AMP is that strong. And because 5 AMP is so strong, the comp is completely locked behind Samira. So I would say one of the main issues with this line, a lot of people are talking about like Naafiri plus Yuumi reroll, for example, as being really strong. And I have seen Yuumi do relatively well if you're able to 3-star her. But the whole issue is that if you're going to invest all of these resources into rolling for Yuumi, you're lowering the chance that you're actually going to be able to hit Samira. So you're really heavily relying on Yuumi being stable before you're able to get Samira. And I'm not fully confident in that yet, which we'll talk about a little bit more when we get to Naafiri reroll, which is pretty similar to this. So at the moment, I think the main thing that's holding back this comp is that the units for it are very contested right now. Everybody's rolling for Nico. Everybody's rolling for Samira because they play those units with Brand. Same thing with Ziggs. So you're going to end up in this circumstance with this line where if you're not able to hit that Samira by like 5-2 or 5-5, you're going to have a really rough time. This is still really good from being able to play from like a lose streak, especially Cypher, for example, those extra resources. You have a lot of different units that you can itemize and you can use any extra gold to increase the probability that you hit Samira. So the comp is back. It's kind of just like a weaker version of Brand at the moment that gets a massive spike if you're able to hit that Samira. All right, next up we have Veigar Reroll, not Veigar. I have had a small attachment to Veigar, but I'll try to pronounce it correctly from now on. Veigar Reroll is one of those comps that is right on the line between B tier and A tier, and I'm not really sure exactly what to do with it. The reason I'm so unsure about it is because if you look at some of the conditions under which we were previously playing Veigar, they're still okay, but like New High Score, for example, they did a very massive nerf to this augment, okay? It went from giving you the Kobako cash out in stage 5, like early on, to now you're getting that cash out very late in stage 5. And I think that change is pretty impactful because being able to hit Kobako is one of the key conditions for spiking this comp in stage 5. And this basically guaranteed it. And now you're not going to get this until like guaranteed stage 6. So you got to survive on your own until then, until you're able to get that Kobako. And in some percentage of games, you're just going to be able to find the Kobako without this. So the question is whether or not just the resources that you get from this are good enough, and maybe they are, but I do think the nerf for this was pretty substantial. The other thing is that all of the units for this comp are very contested on this patch. So Nico is very contested, Brand is very contested, Ziggs is very contested, and Kobako is very contested. And Kobako is not only contested from the Brand players, but he's also contested from the Bruiser players, which there are a lot more of in this particular patch, now that Fiddlesticks and Cho'Gath are so much better, and they buffed a couple of the lower cost Bruisers, and they buffed the opener for that comp. So now we're finding, I think in general, that the main issue with this line is that the conditions that made it good before, they're weaker, and the line is a lot more contested. It's still pretty good if you're able to get 3 items on Veigar by stage 3. So if you have a component anvil opener, or if you're able to get one of the broken artifacts for Veigar, mainly just Mana Zane, but Fishbones is okay as well. If you're able to get those different conditions, then you can look to play into this. But most of the time, I would argue that this line is a little bit weaker than it was in the prior patch, even in spite of the buffs that they made for Kobako. All right, the next comp I want to talk about is Vanguard Marksman. This is an oldie but a goodie. It's been around since the very first day of PBE. They buffed the 2 main cornerstone pieces of this comp, so they buffed Xayah and Aphelios. So even though they nerfed Jarvan, they nerfed Aurora, and they nerfed Jhin, the comp is still a little bit stronger overall. This is the premier AD option within the meta right now, so if you have a really good AD opener, or if you have a Rageblade opener that you can't play into Twisted Fate because it's contested by somebody who has a better spot than you, then this is the conditions under which you would usually look to play towards Vanguard Marksman. Because the comp tends to cap out on the lower side, you really do want to do well in stage 2, 3, and 4 as much as possible, because starting stage 5 onward, you're really going to struggle with this board most of the time. So you're really going to bleed out into a top 4 and very rarely be able to win out unless you're really far ahead of the rest of the lobby. The 4 Marksman version is definitely more popular than the 2 Marksman with 6 Vanguard option that used to be popular back in the earlier patches and during PBE. So the 4 Marksman version has kind of won out here. And then if you're able to get a Marksman emblem, you're going to throw that onto Misfortune, who is just another really good item holder for you, and you can actually play triple carry in the backline ideally. Now, because the comp caps out on the lower side, you can't really afford to greed for this absolute best in slot Aphelios build or absolute best in slot on Xayah, for example. You want to build good items, but make sure that you're not sitting there with like 3 or 4 components on bench in stage 3. You really need to be able to slam items, play for those wins as much as you can in stage 3 and stage 4 so that you're able to preserve as much HP as possible, because most of the time this is not a win out composition. When it comes to artifacts, the main one I want to note here is Gold Collector, because if you have Anima Visage, you should just play one of the other meta lines that exist with Anima Visage, and if you have Mana Zane, you have a ton of other options that are better than playing around Xayah. So it's really just Gold Collector that's interesting here, and it's not a completely broken artifact, it's just one of the options that you have available for you. If you have a really good opener for AD, then Xayah is actually a pretty good item holder for that. But remember, with this line, we are looking to tempo because you are not going to be able to win out most of the time. All right, the next comp I want to talk about is Rengar Jinx Reroll. And the main condition under which you want to play this is having an artifact or having a really strong Rengar opener. And the reason I say this is because you are contesting the absolute best fast 8 composition that exists in the meta right now. In fact, you are contesting one of the most contested compositions of all time. So you have to have a very, very compelling reason to do this playing 3-cost reroll, because it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to be able to hit Nico 2 and Brand 2 when you're rolling on level 7, and everybody else that's looking to play into Brand or Vertical Street Demon is not only rolling on level 8, but they're going hard on 4-1. They're trying to invest all of their resources into being able to hit this. They're trying to roll as quickly as possible. You have a bunch of people that are contesting the same units. So you need to have a really compelling reason to play into this particular line. It is good if you have a good spot for it. So what is a good spot? Having Silvermere Dawn for Rengar is good. Prowler's Claw on Rengar is good. Spectral Cutlass on Rengar is good. If you have Mana Zane, well, honestly, why don't you just play into Fast 8 Street Demon instead? Well, the circumstance in which maybe you wouldn't do that is if you have a really good 3-cost reroll augment and you have some Jinxes in the early game, then maybe you look to play Mana Zane on Jinx instead. But the big thing to understand about this is that if you have a Rengar Jinx from Orb, or if you have some circumstance that really draws you towards being able to reroll these units instead of looking to play Vertical Street Demon the normal way, which is the best comp in the game, then you can look to angle towards this. Understand that a lot of the strength of this comp is underlined by the fact that it's basically playing the best comp in the game and just playing a reroll version of it instead of a fast 8 version of it. And most of the time, you're going to have a really tough time being able to hit your 4-cost 2-stars. So you need to have a solid reason to play into this 3-cost reroll line. So make sure that you're aware of the conditions that make this strong. Make sure that you're only playing this when you have a pretty narrow and strong spot for it, and then it can actually perform relatively well. But most of the time, this is not going to be a line that you're looking to play because you're going to just be looking to play the normal Vertical Street Demon comp instead. All right, the next comp I want to talk about is Fiddlesticks Reroll. This is the same as it's always been in the sense that it's heavily reliant on artifacts or Bruiser Emblem. Ideally, you have both conditions. So let's talk about the strong artifacts on Cho'Gath. Anima Visage, Innervating Locket, and Talisman of Ascension are all solid options. I do want to note that Innervating Locket, if it's the only artifact that you have on Cho'Gath, is not that powerful. But if you have something like Living Forge and you're able to pair that Innervating Locket with Anima Visage or Talisman, all of a sudden it becomes completely broken. And then also when it comes to Radiant items on Cho'Gath, Radiant Redemption is really good. This is just a team-wide very powerful item. And then Warmogs is a much more selfish item that's very powerful on Cho'Gath. So like if you had an artifact on Cho'Gath already, then you would want to go for something like Warmogs, whereas if you were just going for more of a utility-based build, then you would want to go for that redemption on Cho'Gath instead. When it comes to your Fiddlesticks artifacts, you're looking for Blighting Jewel and Sniper's Focus. Most people know that. And then Bruiser Emblem on Fiddlesticks is really good, not only for the damage that it provides him, but also it makes him a lot less squishy, which means it's a lot more likely that he will survive brand ults. Now, when it comes to a purely craftable item build on Fiddlesticks, there have been a lot of people that have been saying that Bloodthirster is a completely dead item on Fiddlesticks. I have mixed opinions on this because I have seen Fiddlesticks die a lot if he doesn't have a Bruiser Emblem, and I see this Bloodthirster as a way of just ensuring that he survives, but he does have noticeably less damage. So in this third item slot, you can go for something like Jeweled Gauntlet, you can go for something like Giant Slayer, although Giant Slayer is definitely on the weaker end for something that you want to put on Fiddlesticks. You can just go full AP on him, so you go triple Archangel. But I do want to note that I don't think that Bloodthirster is a completely dead item like some people have said. I still think it is viable, but it's kind of on the line there. I just, generally speaking, try to only play Fiddlesticks if you have an artifact or Bruiser Emblem in an ideal world. And then as you push levels here, you're just going to add the BoomBots to your board until eventually you get to 4 BoomBot, especially after some of the buffs that they made this particular patch. And that's mainly it for Fiddlesticks Reroll. All right, next up we have Shaco Reroll. This is the same as before, which is that the main condition for playing this line is that you have Shaco 2 on 2-1, and you have as many items for the Shaco as possible so that he can farm as many stacks as possible, which means this is really great if you're able to get an early artifact, for example, on him. Mittens is the best one. Death's Defiance also really good. Prowler's Claw is good. Infinity Force is good. I think even the augment that gives you 2 Infinity Forces, so something like the Freaky Friday, just because that guarantees that you'll have 3 items on Shaco in stage 3 is really good. And then eventually you'll move one of those Infinity Forces over to somebody like Zed, for example. The ranged artifact build is really good on him. Scoped weapons is really good if you want to go like Rage Blade plus Infinity Edge on your Shaco when he has the additional range. That can be quite solid. But the main rule of thumb when it comes to Shaco is that you really only want to play him if you're able to get 3 items on him by stage 3, ideally 2 items on him in stage 2. You want to have him 2-starred. You want to be playing for at least killing units if you're not winning rounds, which winning rounds might be on the harder side because you're not going to push levels at all. So you'll be level 3 on 2-1 and 2-2. You'll be level 4 on 2-5 and 2-6. So you might have a level disadvantage, but you want to make sure that Shaco is at least killing units. And then again, you really want to be able to hit Shaco 3 on 3-1 or 3-2 in this particular line. If you're playing around Shaco 2 for the entirety of stage 3, this is a little bit different from other 1-cost rerolls. You really want to be able to hit that Shaco by 3-5 at the latest. And if you're hitting on 3-5, you are praying that you're going to be able to top 4. So I think this comp is not really that good. That's why I have it in B tier. But if you have the conditions and if you have a good artifact for it, I actually think it can be pretty solid, especially if you're playing into lower elos where those people tend to cap a little bit lower and it's less likely that they'll be able to deal with the Shaco compared to higher cap boards that can just outscale this. All right, the next comp I want to talk about is Naafiri Reroll. This comp has seen probably the biggest spike in terms of the number of people that are asking me questions about it, and it's mostly because of the A.M.P buffs that they made as well as the Yuumi buffs that they made. And so people think that you should just play Naafiri plus Yuumi Reroll regardless of condition. And I would still argue that you should only look to play this if you have Spectral Cutlass. And the main reason for this is that the biggest buff for A.M.P was at 5 A.M.P. They did buff some of the earlier breakpoints if I recall, but the 5 A.M.P went from 4 AMP up to 5 AMP, and that is a fundamental massive buff. You only get this if you're able to hit Samira. So if you're spending all of your gold rolling on 6 and then spending all of your gold rolling on level 7, when are you going to get to roll on level 8 and level 9 for Samira? And you're never going to be able to hit some of the 4 costs. Like, you're not going to be able to hit Nico all that well. It's going to be hard for you to hit Annie if you're rolling all of your gold on level 7. So in my opinion, you still want to play this comp fundamentally as a 2-cost reroll that after you hit Naafiri, you push levels, and you want to have the Spectral Cutlass because the Spectral Spectral Cutlass is going to carry you through the game until you're able to get to the Samira, which gives you the massive spike that you need to be able to win out. So in my opinion, this is still a Spectral Cutlass check. This is not really a comp that you should be playing without it. And when it comes to your Exotech items, if you're able to get Hyper Fangs or Pulse Stabilizer on 3 Exotech, that will make the comp even stronger because it buffs your Naafiri, which is what you're mainly looking to play around here. All right, the last conditional line that I want to talk about here is if you get a BoomBot emblem. There are 2 main ways to play it. The first way here is if you want to play Fast 8, which I think is a little bit better because it increases the probability that you're able to find this Urgot. And obviously, if you have the BoomBot emblem, you really want to be able to get to 6 BoomBot as soon as possible. And this plays around 4 Bruiser with Vex carry in the backline. If you actually look at the stats on itemizing Vex with the BoomBot emblem, it's not very good. And it actually doesn't even want you to pair it with Gunblade. It wants blue buff plus Guardbreaker, blue buff plus Rabadons, but it really just wants you to build Vex with her standard blue buff Gunblade plus 3rd item, and then you can put the BoomBot emblem onto one of your bruisers in the front line, namely Kobuko. So I actually think that eventually you want to have 3 full items on the Vex and put the BoomBot emblem onto one of your frontliners, but until you're able to get that 3rd item for Vex, then you can just go ahead and put the emblem onto her, and that's completely fine. So this is the first way to play it. The second way to play it is to look to play Twisted Fate BoomBots, which I would generally not want to lean towards this particular line because it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to be able to find Urgot in this particular line. But if you have a really good Twisted Fate spot and you're able to actually get to 6 BoomBot, then this board is completely illegal. It's just that it's very difficult to get there because, again, you're relying on being able to find a 5 cost in a 2 cost reroll econ strategy, which is quite difficult to do. But BoomBot emblem is doing relatively well right now. You should know these 2 main ways of playing it. All right, that is it for patch 14.3. I hope this guide helped you climb. Remember that you can now comment on the composition pages. So if you have something to say, come over to the website. You don't need an account. You don't need to sign up for anything. You can just write your comment in and it will show up right on the website. Next up for the website, I am going to be working on getting it ready for the set 10 revival. I think a lot of people are not a huge fan of this particular set. So I think this might be one of the few times where the revival set is bigger than the currently live set, which will be quite interesting to see. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.